I'm here, as Mr. Al Gore once said, to present an inconvenient truth. So, when future generations try to understand how we all got carried away over the panic with global warming, few things will amaze them more, I think, than the part played by scientists in corrupting the figures and obscuring what's really going on. If you look at Stephen Goddard's blog, Real Science, he shows in there exactly how shamelessly manipulated one of the world's most influential climate records, the graph of US surface temperature, has actually been. And this is published by the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. Now, in recent years, NOAA has been adjusting its record by replacing the real temperatures that were measured with data fabricated by computer models. This is kind of bizarre science, unless you're saying that people 50 or 60 years ago didn't actually know how to use a thermometer, or thermometers were in some way less accurate than they are now. Then there is no reason for doing this. And the effect of this has been to downgrade earlier temperatures. Now, in reality, the hottest year the US has ever seen was in the 1930s. However, if you look at NOAA's figures now, it looks like it's getting hotter and hotter. And this has been the effect. They've exaggerated temperatures from recent decades, and they've downplayed temperatures that are historic. Now, there's several posts on this blog, data tampering at USHCN /GISS. You can search for those. And he compares the currently published temperature graphs with those based only on temperatures really measured at the time. And these show that the US has actually been cooling since the 30s, whereas on the latest graph shows it to be warming at a rate equivalent to more than 3 degrees per centigrade per century. It's madness. Now, there's nothing more puzzling than the way that officially approved scientists seem to have finagled all their data. I mean, there was that ludicrous hockey stick graph pretending to prove that the world had suddenly become much hotter than at any time during the last 1,000 years, and it was fudged. Totally and utterly fudged. And there are a lot of things wrong with climate science. Now, it's not often that I'll direct somebody to somebody else's YouTube channel for obvious reasons. However, there is a very recent interview with Lord Christopher Monckton on Greg Hunter, which is very, very good watching. And he does a very good job, which I'm not going to repeat on here, of taking around 40 minutes to explain what the state of the various organisations involved are and why things are so bad. The only thing I'm going to go over here is as part of my reasoning around the climate change models being so flawed. Well, why are the climate change models so flawed? I mean, they definitely are, because Al Gore was predicting by 2015 there would be no ice in the Arctic at all. Well, the ice has decreased, but there are suggestions that this is just a normal cycle. The Earth goes through these normal cycles, as does the Sun, and that's one of the inputs that's missing from the climate models. The Sun. They assume that the Sun is a nice constant temperature, and that yes, there's seasonal variation that's taken into account, but they assume that every year is the same, but not so. Some years the Sun puts out far less energy than others, and some years it puts out far more, and this has an implication, obviously, on how warm the Earth is. Why don't they put it in? Because it's inconvenient, because they can't trace it. It's not really a regular cycle like the sunspot cycle. Very difficult to actually try and account for this, so they don't bother. They don't even say, oh, we could be 10 or 20% out, which is about how out they could be. because we don't take the solar variation into account. They don't say that. The next problem with the climate models is that historically, when they wrote the first climate models, they didn't work. And they didn't work at all. In fact, they showed the Earth decelerating into a kind of a deep freeze, which was a little alarming. After a few years, they soon realised that this wasn't the case, so they looked around for something to do that would make the models more accurate, and somebody came up with the idea of, oh, if we multiply the effect of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere by 3, then the problem goes away. So this is what they've done. And in the official climate models, the effect of carbon dioxide, the actual proven scientific effect of carbon dioxide, ends up getting multiplied by a factor of 3. So is it any wonder that these models are very sensitive to carbon dioxide? Far more sensitive to carbon dioxide than methane, which is ridiculous because methane is 5 times more effective than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. This is just madness, and it's all been done obviously with an agenda in mind. Now, Christopher Monckton Lord Christopher Monckton in this Greg Hunter video, he points out something else, and this is something that I was unaware of, but as an electronics engineer myself, I completely understand what he has to say, and that is that the actual class of equation used to model the climate is incorrect, because it's an equation that assumes that you've got positive feedback all the time, and that positive feedback is the thing that makes an amplifier howl when you've got the microphone in the wrong place. You've all heard it. The sound comes out of the amplifier, goes into the microphone, and comes back out of the amplifier, goes into the microphone, and just squeals. Horrible noise. And this is what the climate data, the climate models are based on. Well, sorry? The Earth has lots of mechanisms that in fact damp this sort of response out. And indeed a well-designed electronic amplifier does not follow that equation, because it has mechanisms designed to damp out this feedback, or howl around as it is called. So the basic equation behind the models is wrong. Let me give you some examples, also things that aren't included. I've already talked about solar variability not being included, which is obviously a biggie. I have already talked about the fact that the input temperature to those models has been massaged. Yes, that's right. The input temperatures to those models are in fact the ones that have been rigged. So, what next? Let's talk about gases. Now, there's been all this fuss about carbon dioxide, but do you realise how much of it is in the atmosphere? Lord Monckton was being a little bit facetious in his video when he said none, but basically 0.03% in the atmosphere, 0.03%, 0.03%. Not a lot. Water vapour, on the other hand, which is far more effective as a greenhouse gas, there's somewhere between 0 and 4%, and they don't like this because it's variable. It's another thing they can't predict, so they completely ignore it. No water vapour actually exists in these standard climate models. Okay. And there's other gases which are greenhouse gases, the most notorious of which being methane, and luckily for us there's very little of that in the atmosphere, but it would have a huge effect if there weren't. And none of this is taken into account, none of it. Now, another little problem is the fact that the climate science models still don't work. And this, I would suggest, is why they've been fudging the temperatures, because what else can they do? But by NASA's own satellite taken temperatures, which can't really be fiddled with, there has been no appreciable global warming within the last 18.5 years. And 18.5 years is really the duration of the accurate measurements, so no global warming since they measured it. And so this whole spectre of global warming being somehow man-made and caused by CO2 is one gigantic fit-up for the reasons that people wanted to make money about it. That is the inconvenient truth, Mr. Gore. The inconvenient truth is not, in fact, climate warming, which is natural and cyclical. The inconvenient truth is that man's contribution to climate warming, his maximum possible contribution, is somewhere around about 0.5% of the warming. 0.5%. The sun itself has a far bigger impact. Volcanic ash in the atmosphere has a far bigger impact than mankind. So, Mr. Gore, can we all have our money back, please? I doubt that's going to happen. So, if you found this entertaining or useful, then please like, please subscribe, and of course please share it with people who might actually believe in global warming. Thank you very much. Bye.
Well, I spend loads of time on YouTube, and I expect you do too, right? You know, I kept searching for things, and this Arduinotronic channel came up on all my searches for all types of interesting crap. What's on it? That's a bit difficult to explain. Just subscribe. I did.